Regrets? Carl's away. Morning, Michelle. Morning. Good. Yeah. Barry's supposed to be here. And Sean was here.
Happy pseudo Monday. You're going to start?
We're going to start, yeah. But if you want to get a glass of water, go ahead. Yeah. Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We will get started now with the Planning and Works Committee. We're still expecting a couple more people here. Councillor Kiefer is away. Any declarations of pecuniary interest? Councillor Jowett.
Item 5.1, the proposed amendment 1 to the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. Staff recommendation.
Yes.
I own property that's within the envelope that's being proposed for exemption for the provincial employment significance.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, with that noted, we'll move on with the consent agenda. Were there any items in the consent agenda that you wish to speak to specifically? Seeing none, Councillor Jaworski.
Thank you. Just on 4.2, the GRT rail crossing policy, I just wanted to get some further clarification on that. For the, it appears to be that the buses will no longer stop on any ion crossings, but on a crossing like the heavy rail crossing at Uptown Waterloo, it would stop. On Herb Street at Caroline, it would not. Is that? Just wanted to confirm my understanding of that.
Through you, Mr. Chair. That is correct. Heavy rail crossings, there would be no stopping when there isn't any active lights or gates.
And in the case of Uptown Waterloo, where there's just the old style crossing bar, there's no lights, no gate, the bus would have to stop there.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Item 4.3, electronic fare management system update. One question that's come from some constituents is whether there could be an opportunity for people who have paper tickets and aren't able to use them or just simply miss the information, whether they would be able to trade them in for fare cards, assuming that they have a value of $10.
Because the report indicates they have to use them by the time ION starts.
Right. And
the question is, and I've had the same question, I think maybe from the same, whether or not they can be traded in for any credit, whether or not they can be used maybe beyond that particular date. I have some old tickets from the PUC actually, so.
Well, that changes my answer. Through you, Mr. Chair. Our plan was to have all our tickets used hopefully before the start of ION due to the proof of payment required on ION. So we provided a fair bit of time for the public to use up tickets. The suggestion of reimbursement or credited tickets, current tickets, we can look at that issue, but we'd like to get them out of circulation as quickly as possible.
Thank you.
Okay, and that's a good answer. I know that the GRT drivers are fairly, they use some discretion. Sometimes when people get on the bus, they may not have the fare. They'll let them on, say pay next time, whatever. Maybe the tickets is something too, although we don't want it to go on forever. Councillor Shantz.
Thank you. Question through you to probably to staff. If I read this correctly, the EasyGo is swiped or passed before you get on the train. Can you just explain the rationale for doing it that way rather than some kind of a system that you swipe while you're getting on the train?
Who wants to? The kiosks are on the platform before you get on the train. Yes.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the kiosks and where you swipe is actually on the platform. So assuming you arrive a minute or two before the train arrives, you have more than enough time. You just reach over, swipe it, and you're ready to go. I think it just makes it easier for people to get on the train. You don't have a big backup there as people try to get on the doors. Plus, each of the trains has, I think it's 3 or 4 doors that all open at the same time. So you'd have to have facilities at each and every single one of those doors for people to do it. This way, it's right there at the station. You have your card, you just have to tap it, and you're done.
And is there a gate or something to go through, or?
No.
No.
No, it's proof of payment. So essentially what will happen is what's explained in the report. If you do not tap, you're not a ride, you haven't paid for a ride to get on board. If you're caught, there eventually will be a fine for doing that, which is very different if you've taken the ups from the airport to the downtown. They have a different method. They have someone going through and checking every single rider on the train, so you can actually get onto that train without paying and then make the payment on the train. You can't do that with the ION. You have to pay ahead of time.
And the Presto is a tap before you get on the train too, is it not?
Yes, it is. It's the same system.
Councillor Urbanovic.
Thanks, Chair Galloway. I just wanted to pick up on Councillor Clark's question, and I'm glad to hear that staff is going to take a look at it. I think, anything we can do, and I realize we've given people some time, but I think we need to remember that probably the majority of the tickets that are still out there are people who, don't have the financial capacity to regularly purchase bus passes, who use it as infrequently as they can, but they're probably the ones that need it the most. And so I think anything we can do to transfer that value over to the new cards and make it available to them, I think would be something that we should seriously look at as part of this. Surely, with the new technology, there's got to be ways of doing that. Ticket value is X. Somebody comes in, trade it over in lieu of cash, swipe in the new amount, and we go from there. And I think if we give it a time frame by the end of the year or maybe by fall when people would have to do that transition, it would still allow us to bring it to an end in a reasonable period.
Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is not so much about conversion from tickets to the card, but more so that the day the ION starts running, that the system is going to work.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I presume you're speaking about the fare system. Mm-hmm. The staff, as per the report, staff are out, when the weather starts to get a little bit warmer, addressing the ticket vending machines and making sure that they're tested and fully operational. That has already been done, but they'll do that again before ION starts. The other piece of work is to install the ticket validator heads, the electronic head where you would tap your card on each platform. That's a very quick job, less than an hour for each of the validator heads. That the podium's already there, the civil work's done, the network information pieces are also done. So we're quite confident we'll be ready to go prior to ION launch.
So I should probably know the answer to this question, but is this system used anywhere else in Canada or the world?
Yes, it's through you, Mr. Chair. It is used as close by as in London, Ontario, for pieces of the system. It's a global system which S&B has. Their hardware is quite widely used, I would say.
So have we anticipated what some other municipalities or regions or cities had at startup date? Any of the problems they have? I guess what I'm saying is I would like to make sure that this thing it runs as smooth as it can, and if there's anything we need to know about glitches or what possibly could go wrong, are we aware of any problems on startups anywhere else?
I don't have any specific information through you, Council, on specific startup information. Our system is fairly new, so we can look into some other agencies, and perhaps our staff have more details on that response, and we can get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, one other question I had is the fines. Is the first fine is $100? Is that what it is, Peter? Or
the fine is a set fine of $200 plus victim surcharge.
Okay, and does anybody know the fine for a car being parked on the track? All right. I know it's fairly significant. Staff Sergeant Smolla, do you know the fine?
Mr. Chair, I'm going to recall my memory. I'm going to say it's about $80, but the towing fee alone is $125 that the person's going to incur as well.
I thought somebody made a good point on social media that the fine for parking on the track should not be any less than the fine that somebody might get for having poaching a ride. So I thought that was a very good point. So can somebody look into that, and we can see what the fine is for parking on the track? Because that would be a lot worse than somebody poaching a free ride, holding up the train for 30 minutes or whatever while a tow truck comes. Okay, any other questions on any of the consent agenda items? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve. Councillor Armstrong, Councillor Clark, all in favor? It's carried. Okay, on to the regular agenda then. We do have some presentations from staff on a few of the items, and the first of those is the 5.1, the proposed amendment 1 to the growth plan. I think Michelle is going to give us a highlight.
Thank you, Chair Galloway. So the report before you deals with the proposed Amendment 1 to the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. On February 15th of this year, the province released the proposed amendments as well as a proposed transition reg and modifications to the proposed transition reg as well as provincially significant employment zones. It was posted on the Environmental Registry, and comments are due February 28th, so if this report is approved by Council, it will form the region's comments with respect to this proposed amendment. Regional staff are generally supportive of the proposed amendment. It's fairly responsive to some of the concerns that both the region and other upper-tier and single-tier municipalities have raised with respect to implementation of the growth plan. It'll allow some of the ongoing area municipal initiatives to continue to move forward in advance of the municipal comprehensive review or the regional official plan review that has recently been initiated. So the report provides an overview of some of the changes, including the intensification targets for the built-up area, the density targets for the designated greenfield area, the rural settlement areas and definitions, provincially significant employment zones, employment conversion and settlement area boundary expansions. With respect to the settlement area boundary expansions, regional staff are of the opinion that these policies should not continue to go forward. With respect to the employment conversion policies, we are recommending that they be municipally initiated either by the local municipality or the upper tier municipality, so that some clarification language be provided through the amendment just to ensure that it is they are municipally initiated initiatives. That's everything.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. Any questions to Sergey. Councillor Shantz.
Thank you, Chair Galloway, through you to Michelle. Have the area planners been part of this preparation?
Through the chair, yes, a conference call was held with area municipalities about 2 weeks ago to go through the proposed amendment. In recent days, because things are moving so quickly with the area municipalities, we've sort of been using this conference call as a way to reach out and to discuss the proposed amendments with the area municipalities. As well, we've been sharing comments. So, for example, the cities of Cambridge, Waterloo, and Kitchener provided fairly detailed information about the provincially significant employment zones that we were able to incorporate into the region's report.
One more question then. Have they all seen a copy of this report?
Through the chair, it is our normal practice that we would circulate the report to the area municipalities. I would have to check with staff to confirm that that took place.
Okay. I'd really appreciate if our staff could get these reports before, I don't care if they even get it before we do. It's pretty tough when I'm reading this on a Monday morning and I'm emailing staff and they're saying, I haven't seen the report. Yes, we talked to them. And I mean, I rely on my staff. They're the experts. And so please make sure they get it ahead of time. Thanks.
Yeah, that should take place. Of course, we won't confirm this until next Wednesday in any event, so there would be some time if there was some concerns. Councillor Foxton.
Just, excuse me, to piggyback on that, I also contacted my staff. They were aware of the report, and I asked if there was any red flags I should be looking for, because I was trying to read through it, and sometimes your jargon's a little above me. And they said, no, they were quite pleased with how it was proceeding. Just so my staff were made aware, as well as my CAO. Thank you.
Isn't one of the amendments in here referred to as the Wilmot Amendment? Yes.
Through the chair, in the regional official plan, there are policies dealing with rationalization that allows an area municipality to move some lands from rural settlement areas to the township urban areas. And so we've moved through that process with Wilmot, and the province has actually adopted a very similar policy framework and incorporated it into the growth plan through the proposed amendment, or potentially including it in the growth plan. And so provincial staff actually refer to it as the Wilmot policy.
Good. There you go, Les. You're famous. Councillor Armstrong.
I was just going to say you're welcome.
Okay. Okay, so there is a recommendation there to adopt the report, move it forward. Councillor Nowak. Chair Redmond, all in favor? It's carried. One conflict noted. Councillor Jowett, did you want to speak?
Should we report that I'm abstaining from that vote? I just want to make it very, very clear.
No, it'll be in the minutes. I've been remiss twice now. I've been reminded by staff that I skipped over a presentation that was supposed to be earlier on. So, Mr. Van Keer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to announce that the region received an award last year from Intelligent Transportation Systems of Canada for the ARIA traffic system, which is an award jointly awarded to the region and Fortran traffic systems. And it was recognized as the best intelligent transportation system product of 2018. The ARIA traffic control system is basically the brains of the region's traffic signal control system, and it's considered to be one of the most advanced systems in North America. So we received a nice award from Intelligent Transportation Systems of Canada. I'd be happy to present it to the chairs.
So I asked Steve if we get the licensing fees for half price now. Or is that something we've purchased? Oh, we've purchased, okay. All right, back to the regular agenda, and we will go to the King Street improvements, Ion to University Avenue, and we have a presentation from Eric Saunderson. Morning, Eric.
Morning. Hello, everyone. I hope we had a good Family Day weekend. My name is Eric Saunderson. I'm a transportation engineer in the Design and Construction Division, for those of you who don't know me. I've been the regional project manager for the Uptown Streetscape Construction Project since 2013. It's been a collaborative effort with the City of Waterloo and the Uptown BIA, among a number of other partners on the project. We completed the first phase of the King Street project from the Public Square up to Bridgeport Road in 2018, and are about to commence the next phase of the project in 2019 from Bridgeport Road up to Central Street. Upon opening the first phase of the project in 2018, we heard some concerns from members of the public about motorists parking and stopping in the bike lanes, that there were encroachments, there were concerns with cyclists and separation with vehicular traffic. In response, staff conducted a series of initiatives to gather more information about what was happening on the streetscape and how the new lane configurations were performing. We conducted a speed and traffic analysis. We installed cameras over a 1-week period to assess video of these parking encroachments. We reached out to other municipalities to see how cycle tracks in other communities were performing. And we conducted a month-long public survey to hear more information about what people thought about these improvements. Pleased to report that now that the first phase is complete, speeds are much lower than future phases of the project, that people are traveling slower through this section of the corridor, and that overall, we believe the improvements have created a much safer environment for motorists and other forms of transportation. The speeds, by comparison to these future phases of the work, are 10 to 20 kilometers much slower. And the average speed that people are traveling in this corridor, 60% of people are traveling under the 30-kilometer range. Unfortunately, though, some motorists are not adhering to the parking prohibitions on King Street, and these encroachments are occurring on a regular basis, disrupting the flow of cyclists traveling through the corridor, causing them to either enter into the roadway or to travel on the sidewalk. These encroachments are occurring for a variety of reasons. Shown here are the types of encroachments, if known, where parking was by far the most significant, shown here in green, followed by drop-offs and pickups, whether it was a taxi drop-off or transportation network companies such as Uber. Upon canvassing other municipalities, we generally concluded that there was no one-size-fits-all type solution for a cycle track in this type of context, an urban commercial context, that there were various elements of each type of cycle track design that had benefits and disbenefits. And one in particular was different points of view on the type of curbing to use. A barrier curb may deter someone from parking in the bike lanes, but it may also cause a hazard for a cyclist trying to overtake another cyclist or limit access or egress into the bike lanes. It would also take away from the accessibility and the walkability aspects of our design. This was a key objective as part of the King Street design process. The public survey, we had approximately 1,000 participants respond with a significant number of comments. By far, the big win and takeaway from this survey was the sidewalk improvements to pedestrians. And overwhelmingly, we received approximately 80% of these respondents rating the sidewalk improvements quite favorably. When asked about the bike lanes, generally the responses were quite positive. But when we continued to ask questions about comfort and separation, the number of negative responses increased, which gave us an indication that this was certainly an aspect of the design that perhaps we should be considering further. So overall, what did we conclude? The bike lane and streetscape improvements in Uptown Waterloo have had a significant improvement overall, albeit there were a strong desire from the public to consider more separation and increased comfort for cyclists and to enhance the design further. We considered a number of options to address these comfort and separation concerns. Shown here is just a few of the options that we were considering. They ranged from bylaw improvements to introduce a no stopping zone as well as no parking in these areas that encroachments were occurring, to additional pavement markings either on the bike lane or on the roadway, to further introducing a physical barrier such as bollards shown in these two upper right photos or rubber curbs shown in the bottom right. We've conducted an extensive evaluation of these options and believe that the best way to address vehicular encroachments and reduce vehicles from entering into the bike lanes is to introduce a physical barrier to restrict these parking infractions. The preferred recommended option shown here as a series of bollards, as well as pavement markings and additional signage to create more awareness for pedestrians as well, that this is a cycling area. The bollard that we're considering is completely flexible and has the ability to withstand impact from vehicular traffic. And it would be spaced at approximately 3 to 4 meters where parking is not present to restrict vehicles from entering this area, and where parking is present, spaced at 6 meters. And thank you. This concludes my presentation. I'm open to answer any questions. We are seeking support and an endorsement from Council here today to implement these improvements as part of the next phases of the King Street project. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. We do have a few people lined up here. Councillor Jaworski.
Thank you, through the chair. Wonderful, quite wonderful work, Eric. I think this is something that when we first had the original design, we received a petition to approve the design as is. And that was something that was from predominantly the cycling community. And then once it's built, we see that there's encroachments. So the innovative use of video, I think, was key in seeing how many encroachments there actually were in this area. And so coming up with a solution like this is, I think, will be instrumental in changing the nature of the biking in Uptown. What I found is where people would not think of parking in a live lane of traffic, and people would not think of parking on a sidewalk, people seem to have no problem parking in a bike lane. And so that's something I think that we've learned, that people need to have bollards, apparently, to stop them from parking. My question is going to be on maintenance of this area. What are we doing to fund maintenance? I know in the next report that's coming to council, it talks about extra money for funding maintenance of active transportation. Just wondering if that covers this, or how the maintenance will be funded for the to work around the bollards, particularly for winter maintenance.
Certainly. Through you, Mr. Chair, maintenance was one of the aspects of our evaluation process that was definitely considered. There will be some challenges maintaining the bike lanes throughout the year, certainly with some of the recent snow events that we've had. We'll be working with our operations groups to further refine those processes. We have included an estimated amount in the report, that what we're anticipating. We are planning to continue to monitor what those costs are and further refine them through future operation budgets.
Again, thank you for the great work. Lots of positive comments over the weekend.
Thank
you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks again. I'm very supportive of this, and I'm really pleased to see staff making these recommendations. My question is about what we plan to do with this going forward. I know we have our pilot study happening, but we're not going to get the results of that for a couple of years now. And I'm thinking that we should be looking at this experience as a bit of a pilot study in its own, and I'm wondering whether we can start introducing the bollards or some other separation as a matter of course in similar projects in the next couple of years rather than wait for the pilot study.
Mr. Vanderkeer.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and as part of my presentation that's coming up, I was going to mention that staff will be looking at developing additional networks in each of the 2 other cities, and as well looking at extensions to the proposed Waterloo, City of Waterloo project, and as well looking at opportunities elsewhere where these additional separation facilities can fit within the road allowance.
Thank you.
Councillor Rentz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Mr. Saunders. Good to see you, Eric. Thank you. It's really good report, and I know you put a lot of work into it. I certainly support it. I just have some questions about the bollards, and I know we've used them in the past. We have bollards down on Homer Watson and Blockline, or whatever are left of them, because they've been run over so many times. And I guess my concern is when I hear Councillor Jaworski talk about they're there because of to delineate parking. In my mind, I thought they were there to separate cars from cyclists. And when you have bollards that will sustain vehicle impact, I'm not exactly sure why we do that. I know for some it says there's a clear separation between the bike lane and the roadway. But for others, they say, well, so what if I drive up there? It's not going to damage my car. It goes underneath and it's not a big deal. Have any municipalities ever used metal or something more permanent bollards to delineate this kind of separation between cycle lanes and the roadway?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The answer to that question is yes, and you would see them quite commonly installed in European cities as an example. Where this particular product, I believe, is the technology has come from. The notion of introducing a rigid bollard versus a flexible bollard was considered as part of the team, and we've opted out of the rigid bollard, primarily due to roadside safety concerns, given the proximity of the bollard to the roadway, and from a cycling aspect itself. A rigid bollard, if it was to withstand impact from a vehicle, it would have to have a substantial base installed below the surface, and would be much larger in diameter, and take away from other aspects of the design. As a team, we feel that it will restrict the number of vehicles from parking in this area. But as shown on the photos, yes, it is completely flexible. The units are very durable, and it would take a lot for a vehicle to travel over top, and cause some damage, not only to the bollard, but the vehicle.
So is that something that we can look at in the when we roll this out to see, how many incidents we have? I guess if the public knew that if they hit these things, they would do severe damage to their vehicles, they may think twice about even going near them. But when the word gets out that, well, you can clip them or you can drive over them, they're really not going to do any damage to your pickup truck, so don't worry about it. I guess that's the concern I have, and I think, word travels pretty fast today, and especially on social media. So in my mind, for the amount of that we have there, I think a more rigid, something more permanent would probably work. But I mean, I see, when I travel in Europe, you see it all the time, and you very seldom see a car hitting one or one being missed. But as I mentioned down on Homer Watson and Bleems, I mean, I don't know, there's probably more that have gone than are still standing down there. So anyway, my 2 cents.
Councillor Erb.
Thank you, Council Chair. First, what I heard back from the community was that not only are they pleased with the recommendations, but they felt they were really well heard by staff, and so thank you for that. Part of my question was what Councillor Lawrence was asking. We had to use some bollards on at our business, and we're told that they had it by insurance that they had to be permanent because of liability issues. Has that been anything raised that that might be a consideration?
Through you, Mr. Chair, not that I'm aware of, that it would be a permanent type installation.
They're about the same size and they were filled with concrete.
These particular bollards are 4 inches in diameter, and a much more rigid style would probably be 6 inches or larger.
Our second question is...
in any event, Councillor, we self-insure, so we're not at the request of an insurance company.
Okay.
That may be a difference because we self-insure.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
They're not being used as often on the east side of King Street. Am I correct?
Correct. The recommendation speaks to the areas where parking is present, primarily, predominantly on the east side, north of Erb to Bridgeport Road. They're spaced a little further apart due to conflict with passengers exiting from parked vehicles, the concern with that aspect of it. The idea is that the placement of these particular bollards would provide some direction to where motorists should be parking. And at intersections where parking is not present, we would increase the spacing to make them much closer together to prevent people from trying to squeeze into a parking spot, for an example.
And finally, the green marking that's been used on the pavement, I'm not sure if it's as a result of winter, but it's coming off on pretty significant parts, and I'm wondering if that's going to be reconsidered for ongoing use.
It is, and it's under a warranty with the contractor that has installed it. So it is something that we are going to be addressing this year. So it was an installation concern.
Mr. Schmidt?
Thank you. I just wanted to note that all of these paintings that we're doing, they all require maintenance. So it's just something to remember when we ask for painting the street or adding those types of things. We try to get the best products we can. We try to have them as durable as we can have them, but they are a maintenance issue. And when you see cost of maintenance on some of these areas, that's part of what's driving up the cost. It's not a apply once and forget for the next 20 years. It's apply once and then you're back every 5 years or so doing touch-ups or replacement.
Chair Redmond?
Thank you, Chair Galloway. Actually, Councillor Erb did a good segue into my question, and that is the responsibility for the installation, the maintenance, and the replacement of these bollards. And I'm very supportive of this recommendation. I think it's something that's very welcome by the cyclists in the community. Whose responsibility is that? Will we see those items come up on regional budgets in the future?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the bike lanes are a regional asset, so it would be our responsibility to maintain them over the course of time.
Thank you.
On regional roads.
On regional roads, and that's what this is,
That's
correct?
correct, yeah.
Okay, no other speakers. I too want to thank Eric and staff for this report. I think this report, in combination with the next report, really does show the region's commitment to active transportation and listening to the community as to what the needs are, and putting some resources into active transportation. So I'll ask for a motion. Councillor Jaworski, you want to move it? Councillor Foxton, all in favor? It's carried. And then the next report is Mr. Vandekeer.
Morning, Chair Galloway and members of Planning Works Committee. This presentation is in support of the recommendation in the report in your agenda package regarding the separated bike lane network pilot project. This project was directed by a project team consisting of former regional councillor Jane Mitchell and staff from both the City of Waterloo and the region of Waterloo. The key goal of this project was to develop and implement a network of separated bike lanes that would encourage more cycling to key destinations in the region. But first of all, what is a separated bike lane, just so that we're all clear on the terminology? A separated bike lane is a designated bike lane that is separated from vehicular traffic by some sort of physical feature. The photos here show you a couple of examples from other cities in Canada, actually. The one on the right is what I would call a bidirectional facility, so two-directional cyclist traffic on one side of the road, separated by what looks like precast curbs with flexible bollards mounted on top. The photo on your left shows just a curb, but those are physical forms of separation. The separation could be in the form of parked cars in some installations. There's another photo of a unidirectional facility, so one on each side of the road, separated by precast curbs with flexible bollards mounted on top. And also there's the option to have just flexible bollards mounted directly to the asphalt. So physically separated from vehicular traffic. The scope of this study included identifying and evaluating candidate study areas for the network, identifying a preferred study area, public consultation on that preferred study area, the identification of a recommended network, and preliminary design of that recommended network. So the project team developed 18 candidate study areas. Now I apologize you can't see the details, but here they all located on the map, but in general they are clustered around the core areas of each of the three cities. So 18 candidate study areas where there's key destinations and potential for implementing this network. The project team evaluated all of those 18 candidate study areas using the following evaluation criteria. I'm not going to go into detail on that evaluation criteria, but you can see it included some key considerations such as places of employment, educational institutions, including post-secondary, population density, community centers, basically looking at which candidate study areas had the potential to generate the most cyclable trips. So based on that evaluation, the project team identified a top candidate study area in each of the three cities. And the project team identified the Uptown Waterloo study area 17, as the preferred study area. This study area was preferred by the project team because it included many of the key destinations that would be necessary to make it a success. This map shows roughly the boundary in red of the preferred study area, mostly following the Great Trail within the City of Waterloo. And just to highlight some of the key origins and destinations for cyclable trips, we have two major universities there, Wilfrid Laurier as well as Waterloo, one within the boundary and one just on the fringe of the boundary. We have a portion of the commercial portion of Uptown Waterloo, with key destinations there, and as well, a fairly large concentration of student residences right within this study area. So the team preferred this study area because it created the greatest potential for the most cyclable trips to key destinations. Now, this preferred study area was presented to the public at a public consultation center in December of 2017 and received good support. So the project team moved forward to develop a recommended network within this study area. The task for the project team was to identify which roads, whether they be regional or city, would provide the best connections to some of these key areas within the study area, and also to see which roads would have sufficient space to fit in the separation features, because not all roads have that space. So as a result of that screening, the project team identified, oh, the animation did come in, Columbia Street between King Street and Haggie Boulevard, University Avenue between King Street and Seagram Drive, King Street between University and Columbia, and as well Herb Street between Caroline Street and Pepler Street as the recommended network. This network is strongly connected to other features, other pedestrian features within the study area, including the Great Trail shown in green, which makes a strong connection all the way from Columbia down to the Herb Street portion of the network, and also up to the right of your on the screen to the northeast of the Uptown Waterloo area. At the Herb Street portion of this proposed bike lane network, there is a strong connection to the Waterloo Spur Trail, which can help commuting cyclists get down to downtown Kitchener. And as well, if cyclists choose to proceed down Caroline Street on the multi-use trail, through local streets, there's a connection to the Iron Horse Trail as well. So good connections to key corridors for cycling. So let's see how this network makes those connections to those key areas. Well, there's your student residences area. There's your two universities. And there's the Uptown Waterloo area. So good connections to those key destinations. It was one of the key goals of developing that network. In terms of how the network will work on those individual streets, on University Avenue and Columbia Street, there are already bike lanes there with 4 driving lanes. But in order to fit the separation features in, the driving lanes need to be narrowed. Columbia Street is, in fact, a city street. So normally the region wouldn't be including that as part of a regional project and funding that. But the project team felt that Columbia Street was a key part of that rectangular network, and so it needed to be included. So they decided to include that. On King Street, there isn't sufficient space, and there are no cycling lanes there currently, so it requires the removal of 1 driving lane in each direction in order to fit in the cycling lanes and the separation features. And on Herb Street, which is 3 lanes one way, the northerly lane needs to be removed in order to fit in the bi-directional cycling facility. And here's what the facilities will look like. So again, the photo on the right shows you what the bike lanes would look like on King Street and University Avenue, with precast concrete curbs with flexible bollards. They were designed this way for quick implementation. Rather than permanent reconstruction features, these can be installed fairly quickly. The photo on the left shows you a sample of what the Herb Street facility would look like, with a bidirectional bikeway on one side of the street, again separated from traffic by precast curbs and flexible bollards. I'll also mention on Columbia Street, the separation feature is just flexible bollards. And one of the other objectives of the pilot project was to try different separation features to see how they would perform, not only from a cyclist point of view, but also from a maintenance point of view. The preliminary design of this network also included developing bike boxes to assist cyclists in making left turns at intersections. This diagram shows a conventional bike box where cyclists are given the opportunity to make left turns in front of the vehicle. So as a cyclist approaches in the bike lane during a red phase, they can move in front of traffic and then make a left during the advanced turn phase. At wider intersections and more complex intersections, the team's proposing two-stage bike boxes, which would require the cyclist to proceed through the intersection on a green phase and then wait here at this green box in order to get a green phase in the opposite direction. So it's two-stage left turn. This is used in other parts of Canada. You'll see them in the York region on Highway 7. Now, because the cyclists are waiting in that bike box right there, right turns on red need to be prohibited to avoid the conflict with cyclists and right-turning vehicles during the red phase. There are good potential extensions to this network, which would provide additional key connections to prime destinations. One of them is Albert Street from Columbia to the Great Trail. Another one is Albert Street from University to Seagram Drive. Another one is on King Street between Columbia and Weber. This would provide a good connection to the recently constructed multi-use trail on King Street, which can take cyclists across the highway to Conestoga Mall. Other connections and extensions include Herb Street all the way to Margaret Avenue, again utilizing one of those three one-way lanes. And another possible extension is on Bridgeport Road from King Street to Devitt Avenue. Oh, and let's not forget the King Street project between Herb and University. When completed, will provide a really good, strong connection between those bike lanes already via the cycle tracks being proposed in that project. There are additional separated networks that staff is enthusiastic about working with their area municipal partners to develop in Kitchener and in Cambridge. So we'll be looking at those. Let's talk a little bit about the implementation considerations. Because some of the features of this network will be somewhat unfamiliar to some users, drivers and cyclists alike, staff are planning on an education program to assist with knowing how to interact at these locations. So there'll be more work on that to develop some information for cyclists on how to use the bike boxes, and also for motorists on how to, with the right turn bands and so on. So more coming on that. From a traffic operation point of view, there are delays expected at some intersections due to the prohibition of the right turns on red. And because of the lanes reduction on King Street, there will be an increase in delays in queuing at the King University intersection. Staff anticipate that these delays will somewhat lessen over time as drivers make adjustments to their patterns. It's proposed to provide a high level of maintenance for this network. Region and city staff are working together to develop revised practices for the maintenance of these facilities, because those bollards prevent vehicles from getting over to the curb. So plows and other types of maintenance equipment cannot get over to the curb with those bollards in place. But we're working on ways to get around that. So because of the revised practices, staff are anticipating some additional maintenance costs, approximately $350,000 per year. This project will be monitored throughout, actually before and throughout. We'll be looking at vehicle, cyclists, and pedestrian volumes, as well as collisions. And we'll be looking to collect direct user feedback on the bike lanes. Capital cost is estimated at about $1.9 million. Some of that cost is attributed to having to do a significant amount of the installation at night or on weekends to avoid traffic disruption on some of those busier roads. So what are the next steps? Staff would propose installation this July, monitoring for 18 months, with a report back to Council close to the end of the monitoring period. But in the meantime, we'd continue to plan extensions to the network and also look at working with our municipal partners to develop networks in each of those other two cities. So in summary, staff are recommending a network of separated bike lanes on University Avenue, Columbia Street, King Street, and Herb Street. These bike lanes would be separated from traffic by flexible bollards mounted on precast curbs or flexible bollards mounted directly on the asphalt. This network will provide strong connections to key destinations in the area. Installations proposed in July of this year with monitoring for 18 months. It'll receive a high level of maintenance. This network is expandable, and staff would look to work with the municipal partners to develop similar networks in Cambridge and Kitchener. That concludes my presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve. Great report. Councillor Urbanovic.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks, Steve, for the report. And it's certainly something that I think was long awaited and is going to be extremely well received by the cycling community. In fact, over the past number of days, they've increased their advocacy efforts in this regard, and I think many of us have been hearing from them in response to the report. I'm also very pleased to see with where you landed as a pilot, which might seem kind of strange for the Mayor of Kitchener to be saying about a pilot that's up in Waterloo. But I think, in fact, if we're going to give this sort of the best chance of success, the intensity of cyclists in the area around the university will probably demonstrate the best demand that exists from day one, as opposed to growing demand, which would come, I think, in other parts of the city. A few questions. The first one, as we look at the stretch of King, I believe you said, between University and Columbia, and there you've suggested that we would go down to one lane traffic in each direction and a full lane in each direction for cycling. Is there a reason why we didn't consider doing a bi-directional lane and then have 3 lanes so that it allows for left turns at I think there's 1, 2 or 3 intersections in that stretch?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the project team did consider that configuration. Putting a bi-directional facility on one side of a 2-way street introduces an order of magnitude more complications for movements at the intersections and can create some serious conflicts and confusion for users. I know that's been implemented in other cities, but from what I've heard and spoken to other staff at the City of Calgary and the City of Edmonton, is they're very, very tricky to implement. So we wanted to keep this as simple as possible. So on a 2-way street, it's preferred from a safety point of view to have the cycling lane on each side of the street. If it's a 1-way street, a bi-directional facility works quite well. But if you put a bi-directional facility on one side of a 2-way street, now your intersections get much more complicated. So staff decided to try and keep it simple for our first installation.
Okay. So that doesn't mean we won't necessarily look at it in the future in light of that being in place in other cities, but you wanted to keep it simple this time. That makes sense. As you know, at the local level, we're making significant investments as well. I mean, in Kitchener's case, we put over $1 million into separated minimum grid this year and piloting a number of things, including a Dutch roundabout and so on. You talk about doing education programs. Are you looking at working with the local municipalities on those education programs as well? Because I think there's no point in both of us doing it. We should look at common messaging that we can all sort of agree to and utilize as part of our work.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, absolutely. We'd work with city staff as well on collaborative efforts to work together on the education components.
Okay, great. I also see in the report there was the summary over the next 10 years of work that's sort of forecasted, and I don't anticipate today in budget to sort of start getting into discussion around how we might move some of that up into in terms of fast tracking it from a cycling point of view in particular. I think that's a discussion for maybe over the next year in preparation for budget 2020. But you did mention working with both the cities of Cambridge and Kitchener in terms of sort of the next phases of the pilot. How do you envision that moving forward, and what levels of conversation have you already had?
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, we envision working together with the city staff to see what's planned on city streets, to see if any regional roads would connect with those roads, to see if we could form a bit of a network as well in those cities, where feasible and where practical in terms of upcoming reconstruction or widening of those projects, or if they could fit within the existing road allowance. I mean, ideally, we would try and fit them without moving curbs. Once you start moving curbs, it's a major reconstruction project. But we look for opportunities where we can to fit regional roads into those plans that the cities are already working on. So we're planning some upcoming meetings with city staff, as well in conjunction with the City of Kitchener. The Trails Master Plan is underway.
Yep.
So we have a staff member on that team as a regional rep. So we'll be working further with those groups, and as well in Cambridge as well, to look at what opportunities can come up and see how we can fit them into the capital program. It may require moving some projects up, but that would probably result in some projects moving out. So those decisions will have to be looked at moving forward.
Okay, great. Those are the questions I have. And Mr. Chair, at the appropriate time, I'd be pleased to move this recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jaworski.
Well, pleased to follow in the footsteps of my favorite mayor of Kitchener. Thank you very much. Yeah, I know. Through the chair, I think this is a wonderful spot because of the ION to help solve some of the last mile opportunities there. We're also working, the City of Waterloo is working on a trail all the way up to St. Jacob's Market area along Albert Street along the heavy rail line. I was just looking at engagewr.ca, the consultation we're doing there for the drop bike share, and I see there's 100 sites suggested as bike hubs by the community. And I'm pleased to see we're tackling University Ave, which is very busy, and King and University intersection, which was formerly a very high pedestrian accident rate, but we've worked on that and somewhat not solved that problem, but certainly made great progress on that. The following up on the question from Councillor Verbanovic on the stretch of King between University and Columbia, will there be room for the 2 bike lanes on each side, 2 lanes of traffic, and a left turn lane in the middle? Is that how the cross-section will work? Or is it strictly going to be very wide bike lanes? And I think there's room for a left turn lane in there.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, there is room for a left turn lane on King Street to facilitate turns in and out of those entrances along that stretch.
Okay, thank you. And bike sensors. So some of the complaints that we get often are that bikes aren't able to turn on the traffic lights because the sensors don't work or aren't in the right place. And I'm just wondering, will that be taken into account in this project?
Through you, Mr. Chair, staff will look at that as well. For the most part, the bicyclists will be operating under the same sort of signal phasing as the vehicles, but where we need extra detection, we'll see where we can put it in.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Shantz.
Thank you. Through you to Steve. Like the report, I think the pilot is a great idea to test out some of the things that you've put in there, and excuse me, I can appreciate that it makes sense to do it in Waterloo and do that first, but and Councillor Jaworski sort of mentioned it a little bit, but where have you looked at connecting to trails in the rural areas? Like you talked a lot about connecting in the city and within the cities, but
through you, Mr. Chair, staff's always looking for opportunities to make connections to trails where we have or are proposing cycling facilities. Generally in the rural areas, those take the form of a paved shoulder. So, but where there are trails crossing regional roads, we would look to make connections wherever possible.
I wouldn't think it always has to be a road trail. We've got the Trans-Canada Trail that runs from, I think, from the market north. So those connections can be in different places, but I just want to make sure that you're not forgetting us.
Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you. So I've always supported these type of initiatives, and so I think it's great. There are some realities here. I mean, this is 2 years in the making, and I guess I'm a little concerned where we're going after this when you, at the very end, you say, well, we're going to work with Kitchener and Cambridge. But, you know, on days like today, or the weather we've had over the last couple of months where we've had sub-zero temperatures and freezing rain and then heavy snowfalls, I think motorists will look at this type of setup and say, nobody's using this thing. I mean, obviously, it's too cold or too wet, or it's too, I mean, not for some people. But my first question is, have we taken that into consideration? And the second is, are we going to keep these lanes open in terrible conditions? And if so, how do we do that? How do we do the winter maintenance on this stuff?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Staff is put a lot of consideration into this maintenance, and yes, it is going to be tricky because it will be a change in how those roads are maintained now, and that's why we've identified additional costs. One option is we may have to bring in a separate contractor to clear the bike lanes, but also you will get windrows along the physical separations, so it may require more lifting of snow in the curb lane. But if you look to other cities, in particular Montreal, and where cyclists have been interviewed there, their prime consideration was the condition of the surface, not the temperature. So they will cycle in minus 20-degree weather as long as the surface is maintained. So the challenge is, as you've noted, is to keep that surface maintained and to meet the standard, which is why there'll be additional cost to do so. But from what we've heard and learned from other cities, if you build it, they will come, and if it's maintained, they will use it even in the cold. There'll be fewer of them when it's minus 20 out than there would be when it's plus 20, no doubt. But they're out there now, and they're looking for this type of facility.
Okay. Well, I hope we don't use the same contractor that's been clearing our bus stops. So I guess I just have a concern about all of that stuff because, I mean, we talk a good game, and then when stuff happens, there's a problem with it. I know I've asked in the past, how do we deal with clearing the ion tracks during heavy snowstorms? And I think the answer we got is, well, we'll run the trains, but if it's too deep, how do we in a severe storm? So I don't know what the answer to that is, but as we move forward on this stuff, I think we have to look at all the alternatives and all the issues that come with it. I can give you an example yesterday how people think. I took my kids and my grandkids to watch the Titans play yesterday at the auditorium, and it was a great game. But on the way out, everybody's leaving, and some people that left early were trying to get out of the parking lot. And, you know, they're kind of just ticked because people are walking in front of their cars as they're trying to get out. But as soon as they get in their cars, they're ticked at the people that are walking out because they're trying to get out of the parking lot. So the roles change quite quickly. If you're a cyclist, it's one thing, but when you're a motorist, it's completely another, as well as a pedestrian. And I think that's a concern that we have to be well aware of. I mean, when we start taking a lane off of a 3-lane road for this type of stuff, we better know what we're doing and make sure that it's well maintained and that people are going to use it. I'm concerned about where we're going with whether it's going to be Kitchener or Cambridge. I think while we have the momentum, and I know we're going to have to look at the results of what we've done in Waterloo, but we need to have, I think, a clearer game plan as to where we want to go with this stuff. And I'm hoping that staff will come back with that, Steve, because I think people need to get excited about it, and they need to help make it grow, and they need to participate in it as well. Thank you.
Councillor Rentz makes a fairly good point. I think on the winter maintenance issue, whether it's the sidewalk issue or it's the cycling lanes issue, it's really about managing expectations and establishing the expectations first, and then doing the maintenance after that. Councillor McGarry.
Thank you very much. And on the winter maintenance package, I know that Cambridge Council has just dealt with some of the lanes, not all of the bike or cycling lanes in Cambridge that we maintain during the winter, and we've put out some communications about some of the little used routes that we're not going to take a crack at maintaining this year, but hopefully in the future we'll have a better maintenance program. A lot of municipalities, as you know, are are really trying to struggle with how they maintain cycling lanes during the winter months. I also I guess the question that I ask is, after the 18 months, and there's been some use of the cycling lanes, and is there going to be any room for changing the design to upgrade for once it comes to Cambridge? Because once more cycling lanes are put into Cambridge, then we would hope that it's all been done ahead of time and bugs ironed out.
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, yes, part of the goal, one of the goals of this project is to implement and learn as to what's working and what needs some fine tuning. We designed the separation features for quick installation. However, assuming that the project is a success, we would look at permanent ways of installing these facilities, which could include raised concrete permanent medians in some areas where space permits, because that would be less maintenance on a day-to-day basis than having flexible bollards mounted on precast curbs. So yes, as we move forward, we'll be fine-tuning, learning from what's happening. We're also looking to other municipalities that have implemented these. They've been having their challenges as well. So I think overall, and even prior to the 18 months, I think we're going to get a pretty good idea of how it's working. First winter, 2019, 2020 winter will be the big litmus test in terms of maintenance challenges and cyclist usage, and also lots of direct feedback, I'm sure, from the users, and we'll try and respond to that feedback as it comes in.
Well, thank you very much. It's a very important subject and very, very supportive of having more people out on bikes, so thank you for your work.
Councillor Harris.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I recall, I suppose, that I'm a supporter of segregated bike lanes, and I know this is a pilot project. Anticipating the feedback in 18 months and how this will go. Obviously, there are some concerns, and I share Councillor Rentz's, especially with winter maintenance. You know, it's just inevitable. Sidewalks, the temperatures, the change in weather that we're having, the freeze thaw, and all that stuff can be making driving difficult on regularly maintained roads. So that is going to be an issue, especially in the wintertime. I think of the segregated bike lanes, and it's more permanent, obviously, on Wellesley Street in Toronto. There's a concrete curb, and I believe they did not have to remove an active lane of traffic to put that in there. That's obviously a concern, I think, if we're going to hear from people when you remove active lanes to put in a bike lane, and perhaps in the wintertime not seeing the volume of traffic from a cyclist perspective on these lanes. Can you tell me, you know, assuming 18 months from now we're having this discussion, what would be perhaps a satisfactory number, or what type of benchmark will you use to say, in terms of a volume perspective? Can you commit to me something now so that I can read back in 18 months, kind of where we had a discussion today, to say, hey, here is a number I think that we could put on it that, you know, I think we'd find this successful or not. Is there a volume, a rider number that you can kind of say, hey, this is what we would expect to continue with a more long-term solution in 18 months today, potentially?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the project team didn't identify a specific threshold that would identify the project as a success. The team is very confident that this project will be successful in attracting new cyclists. In other locations, in other cities, they've seen increases of 1,000% increase. So what percentage would you like? 200%, 300%?
Yeah, percentages perhaps not.
They're all going to be big numbers compared to the numbers that are out there today. So the team is very confident that those numbers will be there. But the other things we want to make sure we have a look at is, how is it performing from a safety point of view, right? We also want to look at maintenance costs as well. We want to make sure that council has full information when they review this again at some point in the future. But we're very confident that we're going to see significant increases in the volume of cyclists, but we haven't identified a specific threshold for success.
I was hoping I could pin you into a number today, but I won't. Not a percentage, of course. Have you worked with, and I know that in your report you mentioned that there will be, traffic will experience some delays, especially in rush hour points throughout the day, that I guess motorists would find other avenues. Have you worked with the city potentially to mitigate on the different paths that perhaps motorists may take to go through more residential neighborhoods to avoid some of these areas?
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, we've worked with city staff, but as well, our own regional projects are encouraging less through traffic on King Street. You look at the King Street reconstruction project currently underway with the next phase this year, we're reducing the number of through lanes on King Street down to 1 in each direction. So right off the bat, that entire corridor south of University, we're discouraging to some degree through traffic. We've done widening projects on Weber Street on the east side, so we're encouraging more of the through traffic to take Weber Street as a 4-lane road. So taking the section of King Street north of University up to Columbia to 1 lane in each direction is in keeping with that philosophy along that stretch of King Street. A good place to divert traffic is at the Weber and King Street intersection. So we'll be looking as part of a possible extension of this pilot project for a more permanent solution is to look at encouraging heavy lefts, southbound lefts on King Street to take Weber instead of continuing south on King. So that would help to discourage through traffic. There's always going to be destination traffic on King Street. We want that traffic to still be there. But I think the projects that we already have underway are starting to nudge drivers that are just trying to get further to the south to take other corridors than King Street.
Thanks.
Councillor Erb.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question was a bit of what Councillor Harris asked it, and the consideration of traffic calming in the neighborhood given the configuration changes that are going to happen at University and King and Columbia Street. Obviously, you're confident that the ridership of bicycles is going to increase, but I'm just concerned that there might be issues on the side streets for traffic calming, the same that we're experiencing in the core of Waterloo.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the reduction of lanes on King Street might result in some off-spill onto local roads. We'd have to take a look at that and see what effects there are. Don't anticipate large changes in that regard, but in terms of traffic calming along those regional roads, the lanes will be narrowed, and in some locations there'll be fewer of them. So that in and of itself will probably bring down your average speeds slightly on some of those roads. And the more cyclists that drivers see, they tend to slow down a bit too. People walking on sidewalks and people cycling in bike lanes actually has a traffic calming effect. So you will see some slower speeds on those corridors once we get the volume of cyclists up. So it'll be a positive effect of that.
I think the calming that I'm referring to may be on the side streets, Albert, Regina, where the traffic may go if they can't make as much time on King Street.
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, that's always the challenge of restricting a regional road, because its prime function generally is to move traffic. So we have to look at that balance. And, in terms of reducing lanes, would always be preferred to do it on a road with lower volumes. But we saw King Street as a key connection point through there. But we'll have to monitor things and, like I said, see how things go. There will be some adjustments to travel patterns as a result.
Thank you.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Just further to Councillor Harris's question, if I'm not misremembering, I think that we have said that our goal in our transportation master plan is to increase cycling by 3 times, by 300%. So I think that would be a very reasonable goal, and if we are able to do that, I think that we will not only be able to say that the segregated lanes are a success, but tell us what we need to do more of in the future.
Okay, I have no more questions except for my own. First of all, there's a small elephant in the room, and that is that Columbia Street is a city street. So are we setting a precedent in terms of paying for an improvement on a city road? I have no problem with that, but I just want people to understand that. Is this a precedent, or is this part of the pilot project and may not be the same in other, when we move forward in other cities?
I can take a try at that one. We thought, in the case of Columbia Street, it was absolutely critical to have that connection in place. Without it,
it certainly is.
We wouldn't have a network. And in that case, we decided the region was best positioned to pay for it. I don't think the city had the funding at this point. On future networks, I think that might be a different decision. We'd have to look at each one individually. So I don't think we're trying to set a precedent on this, but it was critical to be done as part of our project, or I don't think we would have had the network that would have got the support. And I don't think the city was able to support it at this point.
I don't want to suggest at all I don't support it. I just concerned that these networks that we're trying to set up are going to be irrespective of whether or not it's a regional or a city street. I mean, it's going to be whatever makes the most sense. And so the next question is, who will maintain the cycle lane on a city street? Will it be the city or will it be the region? I mean, the city is going to be doing the street. Are they doing the cycle lane as well? I mean, they're in fact our contractor for our roads anyways, so it's totally transparent. It's just a matter of who pays for what.
So I think at this point, I believe it's the region that's budgeting to do all of the maintenance on this network. It is a pilot, so I think part of this is us trying to find out exactly what are the costs. We have our best estimates of it, what type of equipment is required. The types of details and questions that are being asked today are the types of things that we're hoping to discover in the next 18 months. Again, we could have future discussion on specifically how cycle lanes are paid for, whether they're on a regional road or on a city street.
Yeah, I just think we need some certainty on that going forward. I really support this. I'm not questioning who's paying for what at this point in time, but it might need to be clarified over the longer period of time. It's not dissimilar to the sidewalk issue and the street light issues that we've dealt with over the years. Who does what, who maintains what. This will have to be added to the list of those kinds of facilities. But I fully support what's going on. I'm not questioning that. I just think we need to put that out front. The other major thing that I wanted to ask is, it seems to me we may be missing an opportunity here with the Albert Street extension. It seems to me that would be something that we should be considering as part of the pilot. And what would it take? I know it's a cost factor as far as I understand. What would it take?
Money.
How much money?
Plain and simple.
And Mr. Dyer knows where all the money is.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I agree. The project team agreed that the Albert Street extensions, both to the north and to the south, are great connections. Those are those are solely on city streets as well. But when we started looking at the core network, we were already getting over our budget. So this project, as it's currently estimated, is about $500,000 over budget on capital side. So to keep the project more in line, or as best as we could, we as a project team opted to not include those portions. Now, having said that, I think the portion of Albert Street to the north is, if I'm not incorrect, is slated for some form of rehabilitation the next 2 or 3 years. So there may be an opportunity to do a permanent change on that street. The city would do that, to implement that. The portion to the south, I think based on discussions with city staff, they were very encouraged about going ahead and trying to do that anyway, but we would work with them on that as well. But the prime reason why those additional pieces weren't included was to keep the project in line with the current budget.
But the numbers, to be clear, the numbers in the report are the Albert Street North is about $700,000 and Albert Street South is about $100,000. And I think we're going to work with the city to see if there's some way to get that implemented through their funding at some point, maybe even during the pilot.
Could we get a subsequent report on that?
Absolutely.
I'd like to see a report where what are the possibilities of funding this, whether it's through the city or through the region is not an issue for me, but I'd like to see if we can have that included as part of the pilot. We can make a separate decision on that, but it seems to me we're missing a great opportunity as part of the pilot to include at least one of those legs on Albert Street. Okay, Councillor Vanovic, you're going to move the recommendation?
I will. I just wanted to follow up on the comments that you were making because I to be quite frank, did not realize that Columbia Road was a city road and not a regional road. Notwithstanding that, I agree that I think it needs to proceed as part of the pilot, but I also do think and want to be on record as saying that as we look at this going forward, I would anticipate there would be sort of an equitable interest in supporting pilots in the other municipalities in the region as we go forward on this issue. As I said, we've invested over $1 million this year on pilots ourselves because we believe it's a priority in the city of Kitchener, and so it would I think it's important that we all are part of that going forward. And I will point out that at a regional level, when it comes to cycling dollars in particular and trail funding and so on, all of that is actually linked in with the kind of funding that we get as part of our transit system. And those are dollars, as you know, the lower tiers aren't able to access, including the trails that get people to our bus stops and so on. And so I think we need to actually have a broader discussion around how some of those dollars could be shared with the municipalities in order to make sure that we're capable to invest in this necessary infrastructure for our community. But notwithstanding all that, I would be pleased to move the recommendation.
And seconded by Councillor Jaworski. Just further, I do think that we do have to have this policy discussion at some point, and maybe it's part of the pilot discussion, or maybe it's separate. But there's certainly implications associated with this, has been pointed out, in terms of who pays for what. But that shouldn't deter us from moving forward. All in favor? That's carried. Well, thank you. I think this is kind of a benchmark decision in terms of our commitment to active transportation and the fact that we are spending a significant amount of money on both of these projects, and particularly this one in terms of it being a pilot, and with the view of expanding this significantly throughout the region in the ensuing years. And this will tie in also to some of our budget discussions in terms of how we budget for active transportation, and possibly giving it its own identity in the budget, so that it's always front of mind and has sufficient funding, or sufficient funding, has significant funding appropriated to it. Okay, the next item is the Source Protection Plan Annual Report. It's for information. Nancy is here to answer all your questions. And Eric is here. Yes, Eric would be doing the answering for the most part, yes. Seeing none. Thank you, Eric. Well-written report. And the second related report is the annual water quality report. Any questions in regards to that? Also here for information. A very positive report. What's that, Nancy?
I have with me a copy for the Councillor's Library of the annual water quality report for 2018.
Okay.
And we present this each year. It's part of the regulatory requirement. And also the good news with this report is that the water quality that the region supplied to all the municipalities achieved all the drinking water standards this year. Thank
Great.
you.
So that'll be in the library, and then the pop quiz is next Wednesday. Is there anything else? Any other matters to bring to the meeting? Councillor Shantz.
Just a question on the water quality, and that's related to salt. I know I've heard ads on the radio for ways to reduce salt, but are there other initiatives that we're taking to try to reduce the salt intake? I heard this morning that some of our streams are saltier than the oceans, so not necessarily here, but in general. Yeah.
Well, I can start, and then maybe Steve can add to it. But going back to the source protection program, within the risk management officials' role, and it's unfortunate Eric just left, but they are working on a number of risk management plans, looking at parking lots and working on how to manage the salt application. So those are actively part of the source protection plan requirements and one of the key issues. And within the source protection plan, there's a number of well sites where we are seeing the sodium and chloride levels, so the salt levels increasing. And so we're working to see how, through better management of the salt application at parking lots, we can try and reduce that. And there's also the work that's being done with both the local municipality and the regional road program. So I'll hand that over to Steve to speak to.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. There was a question, I believe, at a previous committee about our winter maintenance practices, and staff are putting together an information memo on that in terms of salt use and practices. Regional staff, as well as their counterparts at the cities, work very hard to minimize the amount of salt that is put on the roads. We have a fair amount of technology that's been employed in terms of tracking how much salt gets put on. It's a computerized system now in terms of how much salt is deposited on the road and how quickly and the speed that the vehicles move. So staff are making efforts. I think when the initial big change happened, there was about a 25% reduction in the amount of salt that the region was putting on the roads, because before it was basically, and I'm talking more than 10 years ago, it was basically eyeballed by the crews as they drove along, but now it's all monitored and carefully accounted for. But we're still looking at ways we can reduce the salt usage. But if you look at the maintenance standards to which we are holding and the expectations of the traveling public, they are looking to see bare pavement. And so in order to get bare pavement in this climate, you need to have some sort of freeze depressant chemical. Sodium chloride is the one that's the most readily available. It has a consistent supply, save for the strike that happened at the Sifto mine this past summer, but usually a consistent supply. You can use other types of chemicals, and we'll be providing some more information in that memo. Staff have just been too busy clearing the ice lately to write a memo about clearing the ice. So they're working on it, and we hope to get something to council in the next couple of weeks.
Councillor Bannerman.
Thank you. Two issues that I want to bring up. One, I know we've received an email on, but it is the issue of clearing out transit stops and so on in all three cities, but in particular in the city of Kitchener, where staff have acknowledged that we've been having a problem with our contractor and work isn't getting done in a timely manner. I guess my concern is that this is the second year that we're having problems, and we're not meeting our service standard, which, as it was 48 hours, which is a long time. I mean, it's more than we give the public, and I think it's problematic because if we think of many of the people who are using public transit are people of all ages, but including a lot of older adults, people perhaps with mobility challenges. And so on, and quite frankly, I recall the conversation. I think it was Councillor Clark who brought it up last year, saying, if anything, we need to move towards a 24-hour standard, not maintain the 48. And if anything, we seem to have gone to a 72 or a 96-hour standard or longer. And I'm just wondering, at what point are we going to fish or cut bait with this contractor? And get someone who can either get the job done or, perhaps revisit us looking at doing these things on our own again. Because, quite frankly, we have better control perhaps over our service quality in that instance. So I'm wondering if staff can comment on that.
Mr. Schmidt.
I'll start, and Peter can add in some details. And you're correct, and that we are having difficulties, in particular in Kitchener. I think the contractors we have in the other two municipalities seem to be doing a better job. We are looking at ways to try and supplement Kitchener with other resources to get us through this winter. I think we also agree that we need to look at what the options are going into next winter to try and solve this problem. Just to give a sense of scale, though, this is a big issue. We have about approximately 3,000 bus stops. We try and prioritize those to some, but to maintain a 24 or 48 hours standard with 3,000 bus stops, it doesn't take too much to do the math of if it's 15 minutes per bus stop to clear it, how many hours need to be put in a very short period of time. So that's part of what we're struggling with is just the extreme peak load that we get of effort during and after a snowstorm to try and get the work done. But we do want to look at options. Do we change our contract? Do we look at ways to do it with internal staff? Do we split it up, do some of it with different resources? Those are things we'd like to work through this summer, come back in late summer, fall, and hopefully be able to solve this problem. And we apologize to all of our customers. It's not what we want. We want to be able to have those stops cleaned, to have everyone able to access them. As a stopgap, what bus drivers will do is they will use a driveway or an intersection to let someone off or let someone on. That obviously is not a good permanent solution, but at least it gets us through that particular incident on that particular day. So in summary, we're working on trying to make it better for this year by getting additional resources, but we need to change what we're doing for next year.
Do we know what the problem is? I mean, it seems, we've had a couple of these issues. I mean, we had it with grass cutting. We went and privatized it and had problems, and the work wasn't getting done. We've now done it with this, and work isn't getting done. Like, are these contractors being given? Are they estimating incorrectly? Are they? Is it because this is purely based on low bid? Like, what's driving this? We just seem to be having it in various areas.
I would suggest that some of this specific to this contract, we should probably have that discussion in closed. So I think we should probably answer that in a closed session. In a general sense, for all these contracts, our general experience has been it works really well when it doesn't snow in the winter.
It's kind of like it works really well when the grass doesn't grow either,
right? In the summer,
right?
it works really well when it doesn't rain. So I think what I'm saying is that it's the peak effort that's being required in both of those circumstances, and it's very difficult given the nature of the contracts we're putting out to get good pricing for that type of a peak effort and at the same time get very cheap pricing. So I think there may be ways for us to change that. We can give some details on what happened with this particular contract, but it really comes down to, and it's no different. We have the same issue for our roads program. So our roads program currently, we hire approximately 20 part-time operators. They're hired from December till April, and those are hired. If it doesn't snow, they're paid. If it does snow, they're still paid, and sometimes paid overtime in those cases. The last couple of weeks, there's been substantial amounts of extra time put in. It's how do you deal with those peaks? How do you, through a contract, get a cheap price at the same time as getting that service level with those big peaks in place?
Sure, and I think, I think in my mind this does demonstrate two things. One, that we have, very good outdoor staff in our municipalities that do this work and deliver an excellent quality of service for our residents. But it also demonstrates that I think there's some areas where we should revisit how we can build on some of the intermunicipal collaboration in these regards. As we know, grass cutting was an area where previously it was jointly done with the municipalities. I wasn't supportive of that one when we separated it out because I think it doesn't make a lot of sense. And maybe, with snow we can look at same things, because part of the reality is when we're not using those staffs to cut grass at the local level or remove snow, there's winter works or other summer works that they get assigned to. So I think that's something that needs to be a conversation between both our lower tier and or local and regional partnership that we have in this region. The second question I have has to do with street lights. And all of the no left turns along King Street. And I know we've talked about this before, but I continue to hear from residents. This is all the no left turns that were put in as part of the LRT project. And at times during the day, they make sense. But there's a whole other part of the day and on weekends and so on where there's, much less traffic and they don't make sense. And so, is this something that staff can revisit and take a look at, perhaps, not allowing left turns during peak times or, 9 to 6 or whatever the times are, and allowing them at other times.
Okay, we can ask staff to do a report on that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Harris.
Yeah, just a comment, I guess, on our snow removing issue with bus stops and even city regional roads. I think I'm sympathetic to the way we procure winter maintenance. It's often difficult to predict how vicious of winter we're going to have. I will say to you, the debate between public and private will continue to happen. I live in South Kitchener, and it can almost be a full-time job just taking care of the little sidewalk stretch I have on a court. But if you were driving around, on some of our, non-arterial roads in, Kitchener, the road conditions there and some of these municipal streets were god-awful. I mean, you could literally drive down a farm maintenance road in better condition than some of the streets that we have maintained. So I am sympathetic because, I think there was one day where we had snow and then rain and then it froze. And we had significant low temperatures to the point where unless you've got, graders and large excavators going through city streets, there's not much you can do until the weather turns warmer, which it has yesterday. So, you know what, I think it's always important to look at how we procure, but to suggest that perhaps moving it internal will fix all our problems, I'm just not sure if that's the answer. So again, I remain sympathetic because, some of these conditions were just miserable over the last few weeks, at least days.
Well, staff are going to come back with a report later in the summer or early fall, whenever, on likely a revised method or tendering process for bus stop winter maintenance, because it certainly has been an issue, and it may require, some pre-qualifying or some other factors to make sure that the company does have the resources to take care. I appreciate fully the peak effort. Having been responsible for winter maintenance at the University of Waterloo, I fully understand the peak efforts that have to go into trying to maintain a large facility in the midst of or just after a storm, and the expectations that people have that it will be clear by the time they get to work in the morning, I understand fully. Councillor Armstrong.
With the bus stops, we've had that problem, and I've suggested last year that maybe we should look at a more local contractor and maybe split the contract to have the same person doing the city of Kitchener trying to do out to New Hamburg and back might be a bit of a problem, because we've had to call and they've had to been called to remind that there are bus stops in Wilmot that they're supposed to be looking after. So I think maybe that's just a suggestion, and maybe the contracts are too large for most of them, that maybe they need to be broken down more and spread out more. That might be a suggestion as well.
Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Chair Galloway. Just to add to this mix, what I hear is even when driveways or bus stops are cleaned, if a plow comes along, it fills it back in. So sometimes it feels like we're working at cross purposes. This is a very serious issue, one that impacts a lot of the people who are looking to take public transit. But I got all excited when Councillor Harris was talking, because I thought maybe he was offering to clear bus stops given all the practice he's had in front of his house.
Well, it is a serious issue as we try to change people's habits. Having an easily accessible transit system is certainly part of that equation. And we've had a couple of bad years, particularly with our system being accessible in the wintertime. And so we do need a resolution of this and a solution, and staff are putting their minds to it. And it likely may cost a little more money because low tender is not cutting it, as you can well see. Councillor Armstrong, do you want again?
Yeah, just going to reiterate that I remember that the days that we drove on the snow.
Yeah, we do a lot of that now too, but
unfortunately we do, but there's too many people expect that the snow should not be there.
You have to manage expectations.
That's right.
That's the big thing. Okay, no other questions. A motion to we aren't going to, okay. A motion, Chair Redmond, to adjourn. Chair Redmond, Councillor Rance, all in favor? Okay, thank you.